The biggest change is not actually probably a change, it's more just a recognition of the fact that the world is changing, that in fact the way the marketplace is actually working in the theatrical space has changed, the way that we can actually now get films out via new means is going to be increasingly part of our world, and we just need to kind of get our head around what that means really, and what it means both in a financing sense, what it means in a kind of regulatory tax offset sense, and what it means for business models, I guess.
Well, the first change we need to make is disconnect the requirement for theatrical distribution from the 40% rebate. We need a different test to qualify for that 40% rebate. It might be a little bit messy to define it because, that theatrical distribution is such an easy box to tick, but it's clearly not working because the whole business model of feature film distribution is in using theatrical as your loss leader, as it earns 10% of the film's revenue. So to put all your eggs in that basket and have that requirement there for funding doesn't make sense when 90% of the film's revenue is going to come from those ancillary markets. Well, they're not ancillary anymore, they are the market.
Another key recommendation that's more a policy issue that's quite specific at the moment, that is an absolute must that it has to change, is with Screen Australia. If they invest directly in a feature film, they insist that you borrow 90% of the producer's offset and reinvest it in the movie, leaving you only a very small producer's margin. Whereas if they let that go and you as a producer are allowed whatever amount of the offset you want to use on the grounds that you then invested the producer's margin, which is what will be left over from the 40% rebate, in the marketing and distribution of a film, it means that you've reduced risk for the distributors, your co-distributor that might be involved. You've clearly reduced risk for the investors because they know there's a definite marketing budget there rather than a possible marketing budget. And also it means the producers are going to be much more involved in the distribution, and they tend to be a lot more passionate and have a lot more time about an individual film. Whereas for the majority of distributors, they're dealing with a lot of product, and so it's hard for them, it's not their fault, to get passionate when they're releasing a movie a week.
We should be looking at flexible ways to support producers to find their own connections with audiences on lower budget work or documentaries or digital media. And equally, we should look at how we can enhance bigger budget films reaching their audiences by working more closely with distributors in getting films out into the theatrical marketplace and beyond in a more flexible way. So we've got to approach this problem together. We can't do it in the old way of expecting the distributor to take the risk and to go out and find the audience. We have to work very, very closely now together in the exploitation of our content rights.
With my film Rise of the Eco-Warriors, we built an audience from the beginning when the project was conceived. We've been nourishing and building and feeding that audience now to the point where we're about to release. So we're releasing in a hybrid distribution method, which is not the same as self-distribution. So we're working with a company like Titan View that aids and assists us into the cinema landscape, but we are bringing our audience that we already have nurtured to the cinema experience and then using the cinema as a way into, particularly for us, education markets, bringing schools into the cinema, but also taking the cinematic experience into schools, then being able to release VOD and DVD and then going to television.
Well, I think, if you follow that paradigm, how does the consumer want to consume? That's what determines it. So things like day and date releasing, obviously. Discretionary pricing. So, for example, in the case of 100 Bloody Acres, when it was being pirated, it was available on iTunes, but the price was $28. For a single view. Now that makes absolutely no sense to me at all. So if you look at, say, Google Play as an example, which is available in Australia now, not so many people know that, but the prices range there from $3.99, $4.99, $5.99. That seems like a good price point. And so, if we reach that point where consumers are comfortable paying a small amount of money to access the content when they want it, that's where we need to get to. And I think with all you can eat subscription services like Netflix or Spotify for the music industry is the best model. A monthly subscription, as much content as you want. You determine how much you want, you pay once. I think that's the way it has to really get to before these kind of bottlenecks and barriers and artificial windowing, before that's all kind of swept away, that's where we need to get to.
I'd like to see the online platforms have a production quota. And it's good to see what YouTube and Screen Australia have just recently done with that deal they've put together. We should be talking to the online platforms and getting letters of interest and saying yes. Google we will put your film online in 6 months' time when you've got it. Because then that will give you help and credibility when trying to get private investment. And if you're trying to get government investment, then the same principle should apply as well.
One change that's being floated about is about increasing what is a television and other formats offset from 20% to 40%. Now, whether or not that's ultimately the right percentage is a question that's still to be fully debated. But the reason why there would be benefits in moving from a 20% to a 40% is that in the feature film space, for example, that would enable distributors who, for eligibility requirements under the current system, need to go through a bricks and mortar cinema type release strategy. Where if the other release formats or platforms was lifted to 40%, those people could finance their films in the same way, but perhaps play around with day and date releases, close those windows, take a different approach that maybe just lessens the impact on the distributor up front, putting a premium on the cinema release.
So with our online projects, we started right from scratch. We built a 3-minute trailer, put it out there and built our audience from there. And from that, we were able to prove that we had a market and go on to make further content. So we've been building it stage by stage. With feature films, you don't necessarily have that opportunity because it's often just a one-off film, and the amount of time and energy it takes to build that audience can be difficult when you're only getting the reward of a single audience at the end. But I think that process will probably go a lot further in the future, in that, maybe films with similar content or similar genres will start attracting niche audiences. Maybe filmmakers can bounce off each other, help those audiences to find other films by similar filmmakers or in similar genres, and just more of a sharing, collaborative community rather than building up a database for one film every 2 or 3 years.
We really need to find a way where if we screen our films to 10,000 people or 15,000 people or 20,000 people, that somehow that is going to be valid as a 40% rebate for that incentive. Because creating a perfect film for a market of 20,000 people is actually success. If that film is done on a budget level which can be supported by that market base, right? And it's still producing for the big screen.
Look, it's an interesting time for exhibition in this country. I think there's certain models that are working, like event cinema seems to be working. I think what Robert Connolly did with The Turning was a very good idea, making the screening an event, giving some extra content to the experience. I think when cinemas take that approach of actually kind of making the cinema going experience more worthwhile, value added, have a drink, have a chat, hang around, look in a bookshop, I think that kind of idea works.
Earlier this year, we released a feature documentary called Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, and we used online as our core driver to gain our audience. And first step was we used crowdfunding on Possible. We raised about 60 grand to take our film on a roadshow across the country, which was really cool kind of marriage of old tech and new tech to capitalise on this old-fashioned idea of jumping in a van. Literally, we hired a van, a couple of people, drove around the country, and we used web and Eventbrite and online platforms and Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of stuff, and our own website to push the message of this film around. And it was interesting. It was almost like that was our own little theatrical distribution tour. That was itself a bit of a lost leader. But what's happened now is that tour gave us that recognition amongst audiences across Australia, and word of mouth just is bubbling away. Little by little, it's a trickle, but it's definitely something that we can tap, and it's providing an ongoing income for the project and allowing us to now develop up new ideas and new content.
Over half the content here in Australia is pirated illegally, which is a staggering figure. It means that we're not getting product to people, and they get impatient and they want to buy it, and they want it now. They're willing to pay for it if they can have it. I don't think it's a matter of, oh, we're just going to go out and steal it, but if we know we have to wait several months, forget about it. If we've got to wait several weeks, maybe even a few hours is starting to be upsetting for some people. We want things now, whether it's retail, whether it's at the department stores or content. So there has to be a way to deliver the bigger films faster here to the cinema, and secondary and tertiary films, which are never going to play at the cinema, be able to get them legally a la Netflix or things like that now, and not have geographical borders. That's what's really killing us here.
There's been a lot of talk about it this year, but we have to actually start doing it, and policy has to change like now, because people are watching all sorts of content on many different screens, so we can't just sit here and be talking about the same thing at next SPA conference. I would really like to see changes happen within the year.
Confidence.